The market of Whitechapel stood in muted splendor that autumn morning, its cobblestones slick with rain and whispers. Vendors arranged their wares with the practiced efficiency of those who knew their place in the world's order, their eyes darting occasionally toward the grand carriage that had, most unusually, stopped at the edge of their humble domain. The crest upon its door, a falcon with wings outstretched above 3 stars, was unmistakable, even to those who could not read the Latin motto beneath. In silentio fortitudo. "The Duke of Ravenswood," a woman muttered, clutching her basket of violets closer to her breast. What business has the Stone Duke in a place such as this? Indeed, Adrian Vale, the 6th Duke of Ravenswood, had not deigned to visit the common markets in the 5 years since his wife's death. The nobility purchased through intermediaries. That was the way of things. Yet here he stood, his tall figure descending from the carriage with the rigid grace of a man who had learned to move through the world without touching it. Helena Maren saw him first through a veil of morning mist, his silhouette cutting through the fog like the prow of a warship. Her heart quickened, not with the flutter of attraction that novels might describe, but with the instinctive trepidation of prey. She clutched her small parcel of hand-bound books more tightly, shrinking against her stall as if the shadows might conceal her. "That man," whispered Alice Rowe at her side, "they say he has no heart, that after Lady Ravenswood died, he had it buried with her." Helena nodded, though she found such talk distasteful. "Grief makes statues of us all for a time," she murmured, returning her attention to the modest display of hand-copied poetry she sold to supplement her father's meagre pension. The morning might have continued thus. Helena in her corner, the Duke in his orbit of cold privilege, had not Providence, or perhaps mere chance, intervened. A gust of wind, capricious and sudden, caught the pages of one of Helena's open volumes. The sheets, adorned with her careful script, fluttered like startled doves across the market square, one landing at the polished boots of the Duke himself. A hush fell. The Duke looked down at the page with the detached curiosity one might afford an unusual insect. Helena, her face flushed with mortification, stepped forward to retrieve it. "I beg your pardon, Your Grace," she said, her voice barely audible above the distant rumble of carriage wheels. "The wind? You are the copyist." It was not a question, but a pronouncement, delivered in tones that suggested he had already catalogued and dismissed her existence. "Yes, Your Grace." Helena curtsied, her eyes fixed upon the cobblestones. "And who has commissioned you to reproduce these verses?" He lifted the page with gloved fingers, as though it might contaminate him. "No one, sir. They are my father's poems. I sell them here." "You presume that the public has interest in the scribblings of an unknown?" The marketplace seemed to hold its breath. Helena raised her eyes then, not in defiance, for what could be more foolish, but with the quiet dignity that was her only inheritance. "Even the unknown may have something worthy to say, Your Grace." A collective intake of breath rippled through the onlookers. The Duke's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in the depths of his grey eyes, perhaps annoyance, perhaps something less definable. "Indeed." He extended the page toward her. As she reached for it, his gloved hand closed around her wrist, not roughly, but with the cold authority of one accustomed to being obeyed. "Your name, girl?" "Helena Maren, Your Grace. My father was Professor James Maren of—" "Maren." Recognition shadowed his features. "The disgraced scholar from Oxford." The words fell like stones into still water. Helena's cheeks burned, but her gaze did not waver. "My father made errors of judgment, not of character, sir." For the span of 3 heartbeats, the Duke regarded her with an intensity that seemed to strip away pretense. Then, with a gesture so slight it might have been imagined, he released her. "My solicitor shall call upon you tomorrow. I require a copyist for certain documents of a sensitive nature." He turned toward his carriage, then added without looking back, 8 o'clock. Punctuality is non-negotiable." The crowd parted before him like water before the keel of a ship. Helena stood motionless, the rescued page trembling in her hand, as the carriage door closed with the finality of a tomb being sealed. "Helena," Alice whispered, clutching her friend's arm, "what have you done?" What indeed? For as the Duke's carriage pulled away, Helena could not shake the sensation that she had, in some indefinable way, already begun to fall. Whether towards salvation or ruin, only time would tell. The bell of St. Mary's tolled 9 times, each peal a reminder that the day had begun, inexorable and unchanged. Yet as Helena carefully gathered her scattered pages, she felt the weight of destiny shift, as though some celestial hand had adjusted the scales upon which her future balanced. In the distance, A raven called harsh and insistent against the morning sky. Ravenswood Manor loomed against the pewter sky, its Gothic spires piercing the low-hanging clouds like accusations. Helena paused at the wrought-iron gates, her breath forming delicate phantoms in the morning air. The clock in the bell tower showed 3 minutes before 8. She had walked since dawn to ensure her punctuality, her modest boots now spattered with the evidence of London's less reputable thoroughfares. "State your business," commanded the gatekeeper, a man whose face seemed carved from the same unyielding stone as the manor itself. "I am Helena Marin. His Grace is expecting me." The words sounded presumptuous even to her own ears, as though she claimed a familiarity with the Duke that existed only in the most tenuous sense. The man's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. "Follow the path to the servants' entrance. Mrs. Winters will receive you." Helena suppressed the urge to correct him. She was not applying to be a scullery maid, but wisdom prevailed over pride. She followed the winding gravel path, her gaze irresistibly drawn to the mansion's facade. Ivy clung to the stone walls like memories that refused to be dislodged, and behind the leaded windows she glimpsed the occasional movement of servants, spectral in their efficiency. Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, met her with the pinched expression of one who has smelled something vaguely unpleasant but is too well-bred to mention it. "You're the copyist, then?" Her gaze travelled from Helena's modest bonnet to her worn boots. "His Grace's solicitor, Mr. Blackwood, will escort you to the library. You are not to touch anything beyond your assigned materials. You are not to address His Grace unless directly questioned. You are not to—" "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, I am well acquainted with the boundaries of my position." Helena's voice was soft but steady. A faint sound, something between a cough and a sardonic laugh, interrupted them. A gentleman stood in the doorway, his lean figure silhouetted against the dim interior light. "Mrs. Winters, I shall take charge of Miss Marin now." The housekeeper retreated with a stiff nod. The gentleman stepped forward, extending his hand. "Edmund Blackwood, at your service. I handle the Duke's legal affairs." Helena accepted his handshake with relief. There was a warmth in his manner that the cold halls of Ravenswood had thus far lacked. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Blackwood." "Kindness?" He raised an eyebrow, an interesting choice of word in this house. "Come, the library awaits, and His Grace abhors tardiness." They traversed corridors hung with portraits of Vale ancestors, each face bearing the same austere dignity that the current Duke wore like armor. The library, when they reached it, was a cathedral of knowledge, 2 stories of leather-bound volumes ascending toward a painted ceiling where classical gods enacted ancient dramas in faded oils, and there, standing before the marble fireplace with his back to the door, was the Duke himself. "Your Grace," Blackwood announced, "Miss Marin has arrived." The Duke turned, his face impassive. He wore no coat this morning, but a charcoal waistcoat over a white shirt, the severity of his appearance somewhat softened by this relative informality. "You may leave us, Blackwood." The solicitor hesitated. "The documents require my attestation, Your Grace." "Later." The word permitted no argument. When the door closed behind Blackwood, the Duke regarded Helena with the detached interest one might bestow upon an unusual specimen in a natural history museum. "Do you know why you are here, Miss Marin?" "To copy documents, Your Grace." "Indeed? But why you?" He moved to a mahogany desk where several leather folios lay waiting. "Your father's disgrace is well known in scholarly circles. His theories on ancient civilizations were proven not merely incorrect, but fabricated. His name is synonymous with academic dishonesty." Each word struck like a physical blow, but Helena stood her ground. "My father's failings are his own, Your Grace. I neither defend nor share them, and yet here you stand, in his shadow." The Duke opened one of the folios, revealing pages of faded script. "These are journals written by my great-grandfather during his expeditions to Egypt. They contain observations that, if verified, would vindicate certain of your father's claims." Helena's breath caught. "You wish me to copy these for him?" A cold smile touched the Duke's lips. "I wish you to copy them because your hand is steady and your reputation for accuracy, unlike your father's, remains untarnished. Whether he ever sees these copies depends entirely upon your discretion and performance. I don't understand." "You need not understand. You need only obey." He gestured to a small writing desk positioned near the window. "You will work there. You will speak to no one of these documents. You will return each day at 8 until the task is complete." Helena moved to the desk, removing her gloves and placing them beside the pristine paper, awaiting her pen. "And my compensation, Your Grace." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps surprised that she would broach such a practical matter. 10 shillings per day, considerably more than your market stall provides, I imagine. Considerably. She lifted her chin slightly. "May I ask one question?" The Duke's expression suggested he was unaccustomed to being interrogated by employees, but he inclined his head in the barest affirmative. "Why would you, of all people, wish to aid in my father's redemption?" For a moment, she thought he might dismiss her impertinence with cold rebuke. Instead, he turned toward the window, his profile sharp against the grey light. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "I recognize that even the disgraced may deserve a second chance to reclaim their name." He paused, then added more coldly, "Or perhaps I simply require a copyist with intimate knowledge of your father's work. Do not mistake business for benevolence, Miss Marin." With that, he strode from the room, the door closing behind him with soft finality. Helena sat at the desk, her fingers trembling slightly as she uncapped the inkwell. Outside, a raven called again, the same lonely sentinel from the market, or perhaps its brother. Its harsh cry echoed in the emptiness of the vast library, a sound neither welcome nor forbidden, merely present. Like her, by the third week of her employment at Ravenswood Manor, Helena had fallen into the rhythm of the great house's silent routines. She arrived each morning as the mist still clung to the gardens, worked in the library's hushed sanctuary until the brass clock on the mantel chimed 5, then departed before the lamps were lit for evening. The Duke himself appeared only occasionally, materializing like a spectre to inspect her progress or to provide new materials for transcription. Today, however, the library doors opened at precisely 3 o'clock to admit not the Duke, but a woman whose mere presence seemed to drop the temperature of the room by several degrees. "So you are father's little charity project," the woman said, her voice carrying the crystalline perfection of cut glass. She moved toward Helena with the deliberate grace of a cat approaching uncertain prey. Helena rose, offering a small curtsy. "I beg your pardon, madam. I am Helena Marin, employed as—" "I know perfectly well what you are." The woman's gaze traveled from Helena's simple muslin dress to the pages spread before her. "I am Lady Isolde Vale, sister to the Duke, and I find myself curious as to why my brother, who has not shown interest in father's Egyptian folderol in a decade, suddenly requires these ancient journals transcribed by the daughter of a discredited academic." Helena maintained her composure, though her heart raced. "His Grace has not shared his purposes with me, my lady. I merely perform the task assigned." Lady Isolde's lips curved in a smile that did not reach her eyes. "How admirably discreet. Tell me, does your father still live in that dreadful little cottage in Bloomsbury? I hear his health is quite precarious these days." The casual mention of her father's circumstances, information that should not have been readily available to Lady Isolde, sent a chill through Helena's veins. "My father's situation is modest but adequate, my lady." "Indeed?" Lady Isolde idly traced a finger along the edge of Helena's desk. "How fortunate that you have found such profitable employment. 10 shillings daily, is it not? A veritable fortune for someone of your station." Before Helena could respond, the library door opened once more, and Edwin Clare bounded in, his ruddy face alight with the enthusiasm that seemed his permanent condition. "Cousin Isolde, Mrs. Winters said you had arrived, but failed to mention you were terrorizing our copyist." He turned to Helena with a theatrical bow. "Edwin Clare, at your service, cousin to the dreadfully intimidating pair who own this mausoleum." Lady Isolde's expression tightened. "Edwin, your timing is as impeccable as your manners are deficient. A talent I cultivate assiduously," he replied, utterly unperturbed by her frost. He peered over Helena's shoulder at the open journal. "Fascinating stuff, isn't it?" Uncle Thaddeus was convinced he'd found evidence of advanced astronomical knowledge among the ancient Egyptians, drove the Royal Society to distraction with his theories. Helena's pen had stilled during this exchange, a drop of ink trembling at its nib. The familiar name sent a jolt through her. Thaddeus Vale. The explorer who discovered the Temple of Hathor at Dendera? Edwin beamed. "The very same. You're familiar with his work, then?" "My father corresponded with him before—" Helena stopped abruptly, realizing too late the dangerous territory into which she had strayed. "Before your father attempted to build his reputation on fabricated evidence." Lady Isolde finished, her tone dripping with disdain. "How convenient that Adrian now employs you to transcribe the very journals that might have prevented your father's disgrace, had they been made available 15 years ago." The implication hung in the air like poison. Helena's mind raced. Could it be true? Had these journals contained evidence that might have supported her father's theories? And if so, why had they been withheld? Isolde, really? Edwin protested, his cheerful demeanor faltering. Ancient history now, best left buried like the artifacts themselves. Is it? Lady Isolde's eyes never left Helena's face. I wonder, Adrian has changed since this girl entered our household. He speaks of reopening the Dendera investigation, of publishing Thaddeus's complete journals. Surely that would be a contribution to scholarship, Helena ventured. A contribution to your father's rehabilitation, perhaps. Lady Isolde moved toward the door. I wonder what Adrian would say if he knew you were here not merely as a copyist, but as a daughter seeking vindication. My lady, Helena said, rising to her feet, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil, I accepted this position in good faith. If there is some hidden purpose in His Grace's commission, it is unknown to me. How noble. Lady Isolde paused at the threshold. Edwin, do escort Miss Marin to the gardens. She looks pale, and fresh air might clear her head of any misapprehensions about her place here. With that, she swept from the room, leaving a chill in her wake that even the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows could not dispel. Edwin sighed dramatically. You must forgive, Cousin Isolde. Since Adrian's wife died, she has appointed herself guardian of the Vale legacy. Rather tiresome, but she means well, in her way. Helena carefully set down her pen, noting with dismay that her hand trembled. Mr. Claire, is there truth in what she implied? About these journals and my father's work? Edwin's perpetually boyish face grew serious. Miss Marin, I am constitutionally incapable of discretion, a fact well known to my relatives, which is precisely why Adrian tells me nothing of importance. He offered his arm. But I do know the gardens here are particularly lovely, and that one can speak quite freely among the roses, where only the bees might overhear. Helena hesitated, glancing at her unfinished work. The journals have waited 15 years, Edwin said gently. They can spare another hour. As they stepped into the corridor, neither noticed the tall figure watching from the shadows of the gallery above, the Duke himself, his face unreadable as he observed their departure. In the library, a breeze from the open window disturbed the pages Helena had been transcribing. The words written in a faded hand long ago seemed to whisper their secrets to the empty room. What I have discovered here must remain guarded until the proper time. Some truths are too dangerous to be revealed before the world is prepared to receive them. The ink on Helena's fresh copy glistened, still wet, still waiting for the rest of the story to unfold. The gardens of Ravenswood Manor unfurled like a dream in which every bloom had been arranged by a mathematician rather than a gardener, precise, orderly, and utterly without spontaneity. Helena followed Edwin along the gravel paths, her thoughts as tangled as the ivy that climbed the distant stone walls. Your cousin Lady Isolde seems convinced I harbour ulterior motives, Helena said at last, when they had passed beyond earshot of the house. Edwin plucked a leaf from a hedgerow, folding it absently between his fingers. Isolde sees conspiracies in the arrangement of tea cakes. Pay her no mind. I cannot afford such luxury, Mr. Clare. My position, and by extension my father's welfare, depends upon the Duke's good opinion. They reached a stone bench situated within a secluded alcove of cypress trees. Edwin gestured for her to sit, his customary joviality giving way to an unexpected gravity. Miss Marin, there is something you should know about Adrian. He is not a man given to impulsive charity or unconsidered actions. If he hired you, it was with full knowledge of who you are and what connection your father might have to those journals. Helena clasped her hands in her lap to still their trembling. Then Lady Isolde may be correct. These documents could have prevented my father's disgrace. I cannot speak to their contents with any authority, Edwin replied, uncharacteristically cautious. But I know that Uncle Thaddeus's final expedition was funded in part by certain academic interests, including your father's department at Oxford. That can't be, Helena protested. My father never mentioned such an arrangement. It was not widely known. After Thaddeus's death, there was some dispute over the ownership of his findings. The Vale family asserted their right to his personal effects, including his journals. The implication hung in the air like the distant scent of rain. If the journals contained evidence that might have supported her father's theories, their suppression had directly contributed to his downfall. But why would the Duke now seek to have them transcribed by her of all people? Before Helena could pursue this line of inquiry, the sound of approaching footsteps interrupted them. Alice Rowe hurried along the garden path, her cheeks flushed with exertion. She stopped short at the sight of Edwin. I beg your pardon, she said, dipping into a hasty curtsy. Mrs. Winters said I might find Helena here. Alice! Helena rose in concern. "What's happened?" "It's your father," Alice said, her voice low and urgent. "He's taken ill again. The doctor is with him now, but he asks for you." Edwin stepped forward immediately. "Take my carriage. It's at the front gate. I'll instruct the driver to convey you home with all haste." "But my work, the Duke." Helena glanced back toward the house. "I shall explain to my cousin," Edwin assured her. "Family duty supersedes all else, even in this household." Helena seized his hand in impulsive gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Clare. Your kindness is entirely self-serving," he interrupted with a wink. "It provides me an excuse to vex Cousin Adrian, a pastime I find endlessly diverting." She managed a wavering smile before hurrying after Alice, their figures soon disappearing around the hedge that bordered the kitchen gardens. Edwin remained on the bench, his customary levity fading as he contemplated the manor house looming against the afternoon sky. "You might as well emerge from your hiding place," he called without turning. "Your boots creak abominably on the gravel." The Duke stepped from behind a marble statue, his expression betraying nothing of his thoughts. "You take considerable liberties, Edwin." "A family prerogative," Edwin replied, rising to face his cousin, "though I wonder if you've been taking some liberties of your own with that girl's future. Miss Maron is employed at my discretion, nothing more. And yet you stand in your garden eavesdropping like a lovesick footman." Edwin tilted his head, studying the Duke with uncharacteristic intensity. "What game are you playing, Adrian? Those journals are my property to dispose of as I see fit." The Duke's voice carried the chill of the tomb. "As for Miss Maron, her father's condition provides a convenient opportunity." "For what, precisely?" "Observation." The Duke gestured toward the path Helena had taken. "She will return to find her writing desk moved to the eastern wing, adjacent to the music room where Charlotte used to practice." Edwin's eyes widened in understanding. "The room you've kept locked since her death. Adrian, this is madness." "On the contrary, it is the most rational course of action. If Miss Maron is merely what she appears to be, a dutiful daughter seeking to provide for her father, then the change of location will mean nothing to her. If, however, she has other motives—" The Duke's voice trailed off, his gaze distant. "And Isolde? Does she know of your little experiment?" "My sister's preoccupations are her own affair. Her suspicions regarding Miss Maron, however, serve my purposes." Edwin shook his head in dismay. "You would use that girl as bait in some elaborate trap. To what end, Adrian? What could possibly justify—" "Justice." The word fell between them like a blade. 15 years ago, someone betrayed this family. Someone used Thaddeus's research without permission, constructed elaborate theories upon stolen foundations, and when those theories were challenged, allowed another to bear the disgrace. "James Maron," Edwin murmured. "Perhaps. Or perhaps someone using him as a convenient scapegoat." The Duke straightened his already impeccable cuffs. "Either way, Miss Maron's reactions to what she finds in those journals may provide the answer I have sought for 15 years. And if she's innocent? If her father was merely a dupe?" Something flickered across the Duke's features, a momentary softening, quickly suppressed. "Then I shall have conclusive proof, and appropriate reparations can be made." "Reparations," Edwin repeated skeptically, "for a man whose reputation lies in ruins, whose health fails, whose daughter must sell hand-copied poems in the marketplace to survive." "You overstep, cousin." The Duke's voice had returned to its customary ice. Edwin, however, was undeterred. "Do I? Or do I merely say aloud what your conscience whispers? I saw your face when Miss Maron stood before you in the market. The recognition, the guilt. You imagine things that do not exist. Do I?" Edwin's gaze was uncommonly steady. "Then why place her in Charlotte's music room? Why not simply dismiss her now that you suspect her motives might be impure?" The Duke turned away, his profile sharp against the muted sunlight. "The eastern wing provides better light for detailed work." "Of course," Edwin replied, his tone making it clear he believed nothing of the sort. "And the fact that it affords you the opportunity to observe her unseen from the hidden passage behind the bookcase, that's merely an architectural convenience." The Duke did not dignify this with a response. Instead, he began walking toward the house, his steps measured and deliberate. "Miss Maron's father will recover sufficiently. He always does. And when she returns, we shall see what truths emerge." "Be careful, Adrian," Edwin called after him. "You seek to unmask deception, but the most dangerous lies are often those we tell ourselves." The Duke paused just for a moment before continuing on his path. Above, the sky had darkened, and the first heavy drops of rain began to fall, striking the gravel like accusations. Edwin remained in the garden, his face turned upward to receive the cleansing torrent, as if it might wash away the tangled web of secrets that threatened to ensnare them all. In the distance, thunder rolled across the London sky, a low growl of warning. Professor James Maren's cottage in Bloomsbury existed in a perpetual twilight, its windows shrouded by the tangled ivy that seemed determined to reclaim the small structure for nature. Inside, the air hung heavy with the scent of medicinal tinctures and the musty embrace of books, too precious to discard, yet too painful to open. Helena sat beside her father's bed, her fingers methodically straightening the threadbare counterpane. 3 days had passed since she had rushed from Ravenswood Manor, 3 days during which the professor had drifted between clarity and confusion, his mind travelling paths that Helena could not follow. "You've been at the Vale estate again," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since her arrival. "I can smell it on your clothes, that peculiar combination of leather bindings and cedar." Helena looked up in surprise. "Yes, father. I've been working as a copyist for the Duke." "Adrian Vale." The professor's lips curved in a bitter smile. "The Stone Prince, who would be king of academia without ever soiling his hands with actual scholarship. What does he want from you, child?" "I transcribe journals, historical records from Egypt written by Thaddeus Vale." The effect of these words was immediate and alarming. Her father struggled to sit upright, his face flushing with emotion. "Thaddeus Vale's journals, which ones, from the Dendera expedition?" "Yes," Helena admitted, pressing him gently back against the pillows. "Father, please, your heart." "My heart has been broken since they declared me a fraud and a thief," he retorted, though he allowed himself to be eased back. "Those journals, they contain the proof, don't they? The astronomical calculations, the temple alignments that I theorized." Helena hesitated, torn between honesty and caution. "I don't know. I haven't completed the transcription, but you've seen enough." Her father's eyes, rheumy with age and illness, fixed upon her face with painful intensity. "Tell me, Helena, is there evidence that would vindicate me?" She thought of the pages she had copied, of star charts and hieroglyphs and careful measurements that, even to her untrained eye, seemed to support her father's once celebrated theories. "There may be," she admitted. "But father, I don't understand. If Thaddeus Vale had this evidence, why wasn't it presented when you were accused?" A harsh laugh escaped him. "Because Thaddeus was already dead, and his precious nephew, your employer, refused to allow examination of his uncle's personal papers, called it desecration of family legacy. The Vale name superseded truth, you see." Helena's mind raced. If what her father said was true, then the Duke had deliberately withheld evidence that might have saved her father's reputation. But why then would he now hire her, of all people, to transcribe these very documents? "Does he know who you are?" her father asked, as if reading her thoughts. "Yes," Helena replied. "He mentioned your disgrace the day he hired me." The professor's fingers curled around hers with surprising strength. "Then he has some design, some purpose beyond mere transcription. You must be careful, my child. The Vales protect their own, and truth has never been among their priorities." "Father, the Duke has been correct in his dealings with me," Helena protested, though Lady Isolde's cold suspicion and the Duke's own inscrutable manner flashed in her memory. "Perhaps he wishes to right an old wrong. The aristocracy does not concern itself with justice for men like me." Her father's voice had grown weary again, the brief surge of energy already fading. "Promise me you'll be cautious, Helena. Promise you won't trust him." Before she could respond, a gentle knock at the door announced Alice Rowe, bearing a tray with medicinal tea. "The doctor's draft, Professor," she said, her voice gentle as she set the tray beside the bed. "And a letter has just arrived for Helena." Helena took the sealed envelope, immediately recognizing the heavy cream paper and the wax seal bearing the Vale crest. "It's from the Duke," she said, breaking the seal with fingers that trembled despite her efforts at composure. The note within was brief, the handwriting elegant and precise. "Miss Maren, your presence is required at Ravenswood tomorrow at the usual hour. A carriage will call for you at 7 o'clock. Your work has been relocated to the eastern wing for improved illumination. The services of a qualified physician have been arranged for your father, should you wish to avail yourself of them. Such assistance is not charity but practical necessity, as your continued attention to your duties is required. I remain, Ravenswood." Helena read the note twice, her emotions conflicted. The offer of medical care for her father was both desperately needed and suspiciously convenient. "What does His Grace command?" her father asked, his tone bitter. "He wishes me to return tomorrow, and he has arranged for a doctor to attend you." "Vale charity," the professor scoffed, "no doubt with conditions attached." "Father, we cannot afford to refuse," Helena said quietly. "Doctor, Morton says your condition requires more care than I can provide alone." Alice touched Helena's shoulder gently. "I'll stay with him while you work. The Duke's physician can hardly make matters worse and might improve them considerably." The professor closed his eyes in resignation. "Go then, copy his precious journals. But remember this, daughter. Knowledge has always been the currency of power. Whatever you discover in those pages, guard it well. It may be worth more than you realize." Later, as twilight deepened into night, Helena sat at her father's small desk, a single candle illuminating the Duke's note. The wax seal, broken now, seemed to gleam with ruby significance in the flickering light. "Eastern Wing," the note had said, "for improved illumination." A practical explanation, yet something in Helena's mind whispered caution. She picked up her pen and a sheet of paper, beginning a letter to Edwin Clare. If anyone might provide insight into the Duke's motivations, it would be his irrepressible cousin. She hesitated, pen hovering above paper, uncertain how to frame her inquiry without revealing her suspicions. The candle flame wavered suddenly, though no draught disturbed the still room. Helena glanced up, startled by the movement, and found herself staring at her own reflection in the small window. Behind her, shadows danced on the wall, formless, yet somehow threatening. She shivered, drawing her shawl more tightly around her shoulders. Tomorrow she would return to Ravenswood, to its silent corridors and watchful portraits, to its master, whose motivations remained as opaque as the night pressing against the window pane. Her father's breathing had steadied into sleep, his medication granting him temporary peace. Helena set aside her unwritten letter and instead took up her journal, recording the day's events with the methodical precision that was both her nature and her profession. "The Duke offers help with one hand," she wrote, "while the other remains concealed. I must discover what lies hidden there for Father's sake, and perhaps for my own." Outside, a carriage rattled past, its lamps cutting through the darkness like twin sentinels. Tomorrow, a similar conveyance would carry her back to Ravenswood Manor, back to the Duke's inscrutable presence and the secrets buried within faded journals. The clock struck midnight, each chime a reminder that time, once lost, could never be reclaimed. The eastern wing of Ravenswood Manor differed from the central library, as twilight differs from midnight. The same essential character, yet transformed by subtle gradations of light and atmosphere. Helena followed Mrs. Winters through corridors she had not previously traversed, noting how the austere grandeur of the main house gave way to a more intimate elegance here. "His Grace has assigned you to the music room," Mrs. Winters explained, her tone suggesting she found this decision as inexplicable as Helena did. "The morning light is superior for detailed work." They paused before double doors of polished walnut. Mrs. Winters hesitated, her hand on the brass handle, an uncharacteristic uncertainty flickering across her features. "This room," she said, lowering her voice, "has been closed since Her Grace's passing. You will treat it with appropriate reverence." Before Helena could inquire further, the doors swung open to reveal a chamber, both beautiful and melancholy in its preserved perfection. Dust sheets had been removed from the furniture, but the air still held the stillness of long disuse. At the center stood a magnificent pianoforte, its mahogany surface gleaming as though recently polished. Beside one of the tall windows, a small writing desk had been arranged with Helena's copying materials. "The journals await you there," Mrs. Winters said. "His Grace will attend you presently." With that, the housekeeper withdrew, leaving Helena alone in a room that felt less abandoned than suspended, as though its rightful occupant had merely stepped out momentarily and might return at any moment. Helena moved cautiously to the writing desk, noting that the journal she had been transcribing lay open precisely where she had left off, despite the change in location. She removed her gloves and outer shawl, arranging them neatly beside her workspace, then seated herself and uncapped the inkwell. The quality of light was indeed superior here. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the faded script of Thaddeus Vale's journal with crystalline clarity. Yet Helena found her attention continually drawn to the pianoforte, its silent presence dominating the room like an unspoken question. She had completed perhaps 2 pages of transcription when the door opened to admit the Duke. He entered with the silent grace that always characterized his movements, acknowledging her presence with the barest inclination of his head. "I trust your father's condition has stabilized," he said, moving to stand by the window. "Yes, Your Grace. The physician you sent has been most attentive." Helena set down her pen. "Your generosity is unexpected." but deeply appreciated. It is not generosity but practicality, he replied, his gaze directed outward toward the gardens. Your work here is valuable. Family illness should not impede its completion. Helena studied his profile, searching for some indication of his true feelings. May I ask why I have been moved to this particular room, Your Grace? For a moment, she thought he might ignore the question. Then, with a slight adjustment of his shoulders, the closest to discomfort she had ever observed in him, he turned to face her. This was my late wife's music room, he said. Charlotte favored morning light for her practice. She claimed it lent clarity to Bach's more complex passages. The personal nature of this revelation, so at odds with his customary reserve, momentarily silenced Helena. I'm sorry for your loss, she said finally. If my presence here disturbs memories that— On the contrary, he interrupted, this room has stood empty too long. Preservation is not the same as honor. He moved toward the pianoforte, his gloved fingers hovering just above its polished surface without quite touching it. You have questions about the journals, Miss Marin, about their contents and their connection to your father. It was not a query, but a statement, delivered with the calm certainty of one who had anticipated this moment. Helena's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. The journals contain astronomical calculations and observations from the Temple of Hathor, she said carefully, similar to theories my father proposed before his— disgrace. Indeed, the Duke's expression remained unreadable. And you wonder why, if these journals might have vindicated him, they were not made available during his trial. The thought had occurred to me, Your Grace. They were withheld because they were incomplete. The Duke moved to a bookshelf and removed a slender volume bound in red leather. This is the final journal from Thaddeus Vale's expedition, the one containing his conclusive findings. It was separated from the others during the confusion following his death. He placed the journal on her desk, his movements deliberate. This volume completes the set. When you have transcribed it, the full record of Thaddeus Vale's observations will exist in duplicate for the first time. Helena stared at the journal, her heart pounding. And this volume, does it support my father's theories? Read it, and form your own conclusions. The Duke's voice had returned to its customary detachment. I merely provide the means. The interpretation is your responsibility. Helena opened the journal with trembling fingers, scanning the first page. The handwriting matched that of the previous volumes, but something about the ink, the paper. This is a copy, she said, looking up sharply, not the original. A flicker of what might have been approval crossed the Duke's face. Perceptive. Yes, it is a transcription. The only one in existence. The original was lost in a fire at my country estate 3 years ago. A convenient accident, Helena said, before she could stop herself. The Duke's eyebrow arched. You suspect deliberate destruction. I merely observe that documents which might have restored my father's reputation have proven remarkably elusive over the years. A fair observation. The Duke paced to the window again, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Tell me, Miss Marin, what would you do if these journals did indeed vindicate your father, if they proved that his theories, far from being fraudulent, were simply ahead of their time? Helena considered the question carefully. I would seek to have his work reconsidered by the academic community, not for acclaim or compensation, but for the truth to be acknowledged. Truth, the Duke repeated, the word hanging between them like a challenge, a noble ideal, yet remarkably fluid in practice. What one generation condemns as heresy, the next embraces as visionary insight. He turned back to her, his grey eyes holding hers with unexpected intensity. Complete your transcription, Miss Marin. When it is finished, we shall discuss what truths it contains and what actions those truths might demand. Before she could respond, a commotion in the corridor interrupted them. Rapid footsteps and raised voices. The door burst open, and Edwin Clare stumbled in, his customary elegance notably dishevelled. Adrian, I've just come from Bloomsbury. He stopped short at the sight of Helena. Miss Marin, thank God you're here. It's your father. Helena rose, dread clutching at her heart. What's happened? Someone broke into your cottage last night, Edwin said, his words tumbling over each other in haste. Your father is unharmed. Alice was with him, but his study was ransacked, papers thrown about, books destroyed. The constable believes the intruders were searching for something specific. The Duke moved swiftly to Helena's side. What was taken? That's the curious part, Edwin replied, pushing his dishevelled hair from his forehead. According to Miss Rowe, nothing appears to be missing, except a letter recently delivered to Miss Marin. A letter. The Duke's gaze shifted to Helena. From whom? Helena's mind raced. It must have been your note, Your Grace. The one summoning me back to work and offering medical assistance for my father. I left it on his desk last night. A common thief would have no interest in such correspondence, the Duke said, his voice low and tense. This was no random burglary. Indeed not, Edwin agreed grimly. The constable mentioned that the lock had been opened with skill, not force, and Miss Rowe reported seeing a carriage waiting at the end of the street, a private conveyance, not a hackney. The Duke's expression hardened. Miss Maron will not return to Bloomsbury tonight. Prepare the blue guest chamber, Edwin, and send word to Alice Rowe that both she and the Professor are to be brought here immediately. Adrian, you can't seriously believe, Edwin began. I believe, the Duke interrupted coldly, that someone is willing to commit burglary to discover what transpires between Miss Maron and myself. I will not risk further escalation of these tactics. He turned to Helena, who stood frozen in shock. Your father will be safer here under my protection, unless you object to accepting my hospitality. The question carried a subtle challenge. Helena lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. I have no objection to protection, Your Grace, but I would know what danger threatens my father, and why. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a momentary softening, quickly masked. When your father arrives, and after you have both rested, we shall discuss the matter fully. Some secrets have remained buried too long. He moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold. The journals, Miss Maron, complete them with all haste. Their contents may prove more valuable than either of us initially realized. As the Duke departed, Edwin offered Helena an encouraging smile, though concern lingered in his eyes. Don't worry. Adrian's bark is considerably worse than his bite, at least where the innocent are concerned. And am I innocent, Mr. Clare? Helena asked quietly. In his Grace's estimation. Edwin's smile faltered. That, Miss Maron, is the question upon which everything now turns. Left alone in the music room, Helena returned to the red journal, its pages seeming to whisper secrets as she turned them. Outside, clouds had gathered, dimming the once brilliant sunlight. A single shaft still illuminated the pianoforte, dust motes dancing in its beam like silent notes from a melody long stilled. Somewhere in the house a door closed with quiet finality. Nightfall at Ravenswood Manor transformed the grand house into a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. Helena stood at the window of the blue guest chamber, watching raindrops trace silver paths down the glass. 6 hours had passed since Edwin's alarming news, and still there was no sign of her father. The physician sent to accompany him had returned alone, reporting that Professor Maron had refused to leave his cottage, insisting that his papers required his personal protection. A soft knock drew her attention from the storm-lashed gardens. Alice Rowe entered, her reliable presence a balm to Helena's frayed nerves. I've brought tea, Alice said, setting a tray upon the small table by the fire. And news, though whether good or ill, I cannot say. Helena moved from the window, accepting the cup offered to her with hands that betrayed a slight tremor. Father is being obstinate, I suppose. Beyond all reason, Alice agreed, seating herself with a sigh. But that is not my news. Edwin Clare returned to Bloomsbury after you were settled here. He convinced your father to allow him to examine the study more thoroughly. And did he find anything the constable missed? Alice's expression grew troubled. Not precisely, but he noticed something curious about the letter that was taken. She hesitated, as if uncertain how to proceed. Speak plainly, Alice. We are well beyond the luxury of delicacy. Mr. Clare said the letter could not have been the Duke's note, as you supposed. He found that note tucked into your father's Bible. The missing letter must have been another entirely. Helena frowned, mentally cataloguing the correspondence she had received in recent days. There was no other letter. So I told Mr. Clare. Yet he insists that your father spoke of a letter delivered the morning of your departure for Ravenswood, a letter bearing no signature, containing a single sentence. The final journal holds the truth. The teacup in Helena's hand stilled halfway to her lips. I received no such letter. Precisely the mystery. Your father insists it was left on his desk for you, yet you never saw it. Helena set down her cup, its contents suddenly unpalatable. Someone knew about the final journal before the Duke revealed its existence to me today. So it would seem. Alice leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, despite the privacy of the room. Helena, there is something else. Mr. Clare examined the damaged books in your father's study. He says they were not randomly destroyed. Specific pages were removed, pages containing references to Thaddeus Vale's expedition. The implication hung in the air between them. Whoever had ransacked the cottage was searching for information about the very journals Helena had been transcribing. "The Duke believes I will be safer here," Helena murmured, more to herself than to Alice. "Perhaps, but I cannot help wondering if the danger follows not from where you are, but from what you know." Alice's normally cheerful countenance had grown solemn. "Or what someone believes you know." A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes, making both women start. The fire in the grate flickered, sending grotesque shadows dancing across the ornate wallpaper. "I should return to your father," Alice said, rising. "He has agreed to lock himself in for the night, with a constable posted at the street corner. Tomorrow Edwin will escort him here, whether he consents or protests." Helena embraced her friend, drawing strength from her steadfast presence. "Take care, Alice. If there is danger in knowledge, you may share in it merely by association. Some risks are worth taking." Alice squeezed Helena's hands. "Now, try to rest. Tomorrow may bring clarity or greater confusion." After Alice's departure, Helena found sleep impossible. The opulent guest chamber, with its silk hangings and mahogany furnishings, felt more like a beautiful prison than a sanctuary. Eventually, she wrapped herself in a borrowed dressing gown and slipped into the corridor, drawn by an inexplicable urge to return to the music room and the mysterious red journal. The hallways of Ravenswood lay hushed in midnight solemnity, the only sound the occasional creak of ancient timbers settling. Helena navigated by memory and the faint illumination of wall sconces left burning through the night. As she approached the eastern wing, however, she noticed a thread of light beneath the music room door. She hesitated, hand poised to knock, when the unmistakable notes of a pianoforte stopped her. Someone was playing, a melancholy nocturne that seemed to give voice to the very walls of the house. Helena stood transfixed as the music rose and fell, each phrase executed with technical precision, yet imbued with profound emotion. When the final chord faded into silence, Helena found herself trembling. She knew without being told who sat at the instrument. Only one person in this house would approach Charlotte Vale's pianoforte in the dead of night. She knocked gently, then opened the door without waiting for a response. The Duke sat at the instrument, his back to her, hands still resting on the keys, as though reluctant to break contact with the music that had briefly animated them. "Chopin," Helena said softly. "Nocturne in C-sharp minor." He did not turn, but his shoulders tensed slightly at her voice. "You know the piece. My mother played it often, before her illness." Helena moved into the room, drawn by some force she could not name. "I did not know you were a musician, Your Grace." "I am not." His hands finally lifted from the keys. "Charlotte played. I merely preserve the memory." He rose from the bench and turned to face her, his expression inscrutable in the dim light. Gone was the formal attire of daytime. He wore only a white shirt and dark trousers, his throat bare of cravat, his feet in soft leather slippers. This unexpected informality, this glimpse of the man beneath the ducal armor, struck Helena more forcibly than any words could have done. "You should not wander these corridors alone at night, Miss Marin," he said, his voice low. "This house holds secrets that do not rest easily. As does its master, it would seem." The words escaped before prudence could contain them. To her surprise, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. Observant as always, "What brings you here at this hour, if not the call of restless secrets?" Helena gestured toward the desk where the red journal lay. "I could not sleep. My mind returns again and again to that journal, and to the question of why someone would ransack my father's study after its existence was revealed to me." "You suspect me?" His tone held no offense, merely curiosity. "I suspect that you know more than you have shared," Helena replied carefully. "About the journals, about my father's disgrace, about the connection between them." The Duke moved to the window, gazing out at the rain-swept gardens. For a long moment he said nothing, the silence stretching between them like a living thing. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had not heard before. 15 years ago, my uncle Thaddeus died in Egypt. His journals were shipped home in a sealed trunk, along with artifacts from the Temple of Hathor. I was 20 then, newly responsible for the Vale legacy after my father's death. The journals were placed in the family archive without examination. He turned to face her, his features half illuminated by the single lamp burning on the desk. 6 months later, your father published his theories on ancient Egyptian astronomical knowledge, theories that bore striking similarities to observations Thaddeus had recorded in his private journals. "You believed he stole my uncle's work," Helena said, understanding dawning. "But how could he have accessed journals that were sealed in your archive?" Precisely the question that has haunted me for 15 years. The Duke's gaze held hers with uncomfortable intensity. When accusations of academic theft arose against your father, I was asked to produce Thaddeus's journals as evidence. I refused. Why? Helena's voice barely rose above a whisper. Because one journal was missing, the final volume, the one containing the conclusive evidence that might have either condemned or exonerated your father. His jaw tightened. I could not risk exposing a family scandal without complete information. And now? Why reveal this to me now? The Duke moved toward her, close enough that she could see the subtle signs of weariness etched around his eyes. Because 3 months ago, this copy of the final journal was sent to me anonymously. Its contents suggest that neither Thaddeus nor your father originated these theories about Egyptian astronomy. They were working together, collaborating across social boundaries that neither could publicly acknowledge. Helena's mind raced. Then my father was not a thief, nor was my uncle's work stolen, the Duke agreed. But someone wanted the world to believe otherwise, someone who arranged for crucial evidence to vanish at the precise moment it was needed. A chill ran through Helena that had nothing to do with the night air. And now that same someone does not want me to complete the transcription that would reveal the truth. So it would appear. The Duke's voice had softened, losing some of its habitual coldness. Your father is in danger not because of what he knows, but because of what you may discover. As if summoned by his words, a sudden commotion erupted from the distant entrance hall, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the unmistakable sound of urgency. The Duke moved swiftly to the door, Helena close behind him. Edwin Clare appeared at the end of the corridor, his face ashen in the dim light. Adrian, Miss Marin, thank God you're both here. It's the professor. There's been a fire at his cottage. He's alive, but barely. They're bringing him now. Helena's world contracted to a single point of pain. She swayed, her vision darkening at the edges. Before she could fall, she felt the Duke's hand at her elbow, steadying her. Breathe, Miss Marin, he commanded quietly. Your father needs your strength now, not your collapse. She drew a shuddering breath, forcing herself to straightness. Take me to him. As they hurried through the corridors, the Duke's hand remained at her elbow, his touch light yet somehow anchoring. Behind them, the music room stood empty, the lamp still burning beside the red journal whose secrets had nearly cost a man his life. On the pianoforte, the sheet music for Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor fluttered in the draught from the open door, the notes like tears upon the page. Dawn painted the windows of Ravenswood Manor with pale gold, illuminating the exhausted faces of those who had maintained vigil through the night. Professor Marin lay in one of the guest chambers, his breathing labored but stable, his hands and face bearing the angry marks of his encounter with fire. The physician, summoned from his bed in the dark hours, had administered what treatment he could and departed with instructions for ongoing care. Helena sat beside her father's bed, just as she had done in Bloomsbury, though in surroundings of such luxury as the professor had not known in decades. The irony of it twisted within her like a blade. He had finally entered the hallowed halls of aristocratic privilege, but in a state that prevented him from either appreciating or resenting the fact. A gentle knock announced Alice, bearing a tray with tea and toast. You must eat, she insisted, setting it on the bedside table. Starving yourself serves no one, least of all your father. Helena accepted the cup mechanically, more to satisfy Alice than from any desire for sustenance. Has the constable determined how the fire began? Alice's expression clouded. Edwin says they found evidence of lamp oil splashed deliberately around the study. There can be no doubt it was intentional. Murder, Helena whispered, the word bitter on her tongue. Attempted murder, Alice corrected firmly. And unsuccessful, thanks to Providence and the neighbor who saw the smoke. She hesitated, then added, Edwin also said something curious was found in the ashes. A signet ring, not your father's. It bears an emblem that the constable did not recognize. Helena's attention sharpened. A ring? Where is it now? The Duke has it. He seemed disturbed when Edwin described it. Alice glanced toward the door, lowering her voice. There's something else. Lady Isolde arrived an hour ago, summoned by news of the commotion. She and the Duke are closeted in his study, their voices raised enough that even the servants comment upon it. Before Helena could respond, the door opened to admit the Duke himself. He looked as if he had not slept, his formal attire from the previous day replaced by a simple black coat over a white shirt. In his hand, he carried a small velvet pouch. Leave us, Miss Rowe, he said, his tone brooking no argument. Miss Marin and I have matters to discuss that cannot wait upon convenience or propriety. Alice squeezed Helena's shoulder before departing, closing the door softly behind her. The Duke moved to stand at the foot of the professor's bed, his gaze lingering on the injured man before shifting to Helena. "How much did your father tell you about his relationship with Thaddeus Vale?" The abruptness of the question caught Helena off guard. "Very little. He mentioned collaboration, but no details. Yet he kept certain mementos of that collaboration." The Duke opened the velvet pouch and extracted a signet ring, its gold blackened by fire, but its emblem still clear, a falcon with wings outstretched above 3 stars, the Vale crest. "This was found in your father's study after the fire," he continued. "A ring identical to this one was worn by Thaddeus Vale until the day he died. It was buried with him in Egypt." Helena stared at the ring, understanding beginning to dawn. "You believe my father stole it?" "I believe," the Duke said carefully, "that this ring was given to your father as a symbol of a bond that transcended conventional social boundaries, a bond that certain members of the Vale family found unacceptable." He placed the ring on the bedside table, its presence between them like a challenge. 15 years ago, rumors circulated about the nature of my uncle's associations in academic circles, rumors that threatened the Vale reputation. When he died in Egypt, those rumors died with him, or so my family believed. "Until my father published theories based on their collaborative work," Helena said slowly. "Theories that suggested an ongoing intellectual partnership." "Precisely." The Duke's expression was unreadable. "The accusations of plagiarism served a dual purpose, discrediting your father while preserving the illusion that no meaningful connection had existed between him and my uncle." Helena's mind raced ahead of his words. "You suspect someone in your family orchestrated my father's disgrace, and now that same person has tried to ensure his permanent silence?" The Duke inclined his head slightly. "The final journal contains more than astronomical theories, Miss Marin. It contains personal reflections that would confirm the depth of the relationship between these two men, a relationship that certain parties would still prefer to remain buried." "Lady Isolde," Helena said, the pieces falling into place. "She was here the day you gave me the red journal. She would have known what it contained. My sister has always been zealous in protection of the Vale name." His voice held a complexity of emotion that Helena could not fully decipher. Whether that zeal extends to attempted murder remains to be proven. As if summoned by their discussion, the door swung open to reveal Lady Isolde herself, her face a mask of cold fury. "Discussing me in my absence, brother? How discourteous, though perhaps to be expected given your current choice of company." She swept into the room like an icy wind, her gaze flickering dismissively over the unconscious professor before fixing upon Helena with undisguised contempt. "I suppose she has convinced you of my villainy, the scheming daughter of a disgraced academic, worming her way into your trust with tales of persecution and injustice." The Duke remained unmoved by her dramatics. "The fire at Professor Marin's cottage was not accident, Isolde, nor was the theft of specific documents from his study. And naturally, you suspect me." Lady Isolde laughed, a sound devoid of mirth. "Because I alone have had the courage to speak against this farce, this rehabilitation of a man who sought to destroy our family's honor. Honor built upon lies is merely arrogance by another name," the Duke replied, his voice quiet yet resonant with authority. "Uncle Thaddeus and James Marin were colleagues, friends, perhaps more. Their work together advanced human knowledge. What honor is there in denying that truth?" Lady Isolde's composure cracked, revealing the raw emotion beneath. "You were not here, Adrian. You did not see what father suffered when the rumors began, the whispers, the snubs, the loss of position. Thaddeus's proclivities threatened everything our family had built over generations. So you ensured that when accusations of plagiarism arose, the evidence that might have exonerated Professor Marin conveniently disappeared." The Duke's tone was not accusatory but weary, as if he had long suspected this truth, but had hoped to be proven wrong. "I protected our family," Lady Isolde insisted, her voice rising, "just as I have always done, while you retreated into cold isolation after Charlotte's death. Someone had to guard the Vale legacy." "And the fire?" Helena asked quietly, rising from her chair to face Lady Isolde directly. "Was that also protection of your family's legacy?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lady Isolde's perfect features. "I know nothing of any fire. Whatever misfortune befell your father was deliberate arson," the Duke interrupted, "with clear intent to destroy both the professor and any evidence he might possess." Lady Isolde's gaze darted between them, calculation evident in her eyes. "If some harm has come to Professor Marin, I regret it, but I had no part in it. Perhaps your investigations have drawn attention from quarters more dangerous than family disapproval. A convenient deflection, the Duke observed, yet the timing suggests otherwise. From the bed came a sudden sound, a weak cough, followed by a rasping voice that nonetheless carried the unmistakable cadence of academic precision. "The ring," Professor Marin whispered, his eyes fluttering open. "Thaddeus gave it before he sailed, symbol of our covenant." Helena was instantly at his side, supporting him as he struggled to continue. "Father, please, conserve your strength." But the professor's gaze had fixed upon Lady Isolde with surprising intensity. "Not her," he said, each word an effort. "The fire, not her doing." The Duke moved closer, his expression intent. "You saw who set the fire, Professor?" "Not saw, heard." The professor's hand fumbled weakly toward the water glass. Helena held it to his lips, allowing him a small sip before he continued. "A man's voice, giving orders, about the journals, about destroying evidence. Did you recognize this voice?" the Duke pressed. Professor Marin's eyes closed briefly, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. Elegant speech, aristocratic but not feminine. His gaze shifted to the Duke. Familiar, though, very familiar. A terrible suspicion began to form in Helena's mind, one she dared not voice. The Duke, however, had reached the same conclusion. "Edwin," he said, the single word falling into the room like a stone into still water. Lady Isolde's reaction was immediate and vehement. "Absurd. Edwin is a fool, a bumbler. He lacks the intellect for such schemes." "A carefully cultivated impression," the Duke replied, "one that has served him well as both shield and disguise." Helena remembered Edwin's timely appearances, his seemingly innocent questions, his access to both Ravenswood Manor and her father's cottage. "He knew about the final journal," she said slowly. "He was the first to mention it, even before you showed it to me, Your Grace. And he was conveniently present at every critical moment," the Duke agreed, moving toward the door with sudden urgency, "including the fire, which he reported but claimed not to have witnessed directly." As if to confirm their suspicions, a commotion erupted in the corridor outside. Raised voices, rapid footsteps, the sound of struggle. The door burst open to reveal Edwin Clare himself, his affable expression replaced by one of cold calculation. In his hand, he held a pistol, its barrel aimed directly at the Duke's heart. "How disappointing," Edwin said, his voice stripped of its usual jovial warmth. "I had hoped to resolve this matter more discreetly. Now I see that direct methods are required." Behind him, Helena could see servants hovering in terrified uncertainty. Lady Isolde had gone perfectly still, her face drained of color. "Edwin," the Duke said calmly, as if addressing a slightly wayward child rather than an armed threat. "This accomplishes nothing. The journals are already secured, copies made, the truth preserved. Perhaps," Edwin's smile was chilling in its emptiness, "but there remains the matter of witnesses." His gaze shifted to Helena, then to the professor. Tragic, really. The fire-weakened invalid succumbing to his injuries, his grieving daughter taking her own life in despair, the Duke shot while attempting to prevent the tragedy by an intruder who escaped into the night. He gestured with the pistol, a neat conclusion to an unfortunate affair, one that preserves the Vale family reputation while eliminating all inconvenient loose ends. "You are not a Vale," Lady Isolde said, finding her voice at last. "You have no claim to our name, no right to speak of preserving our reputation." Edwin's expression hardened. "No claim? My mother was Thaddeus Vale's sister, your aunt, Isolde. Yet when she married beneath her station, she was expunged from family records, denied her birthright, her son relegated to the status of distant cousin rather than acknowledged nephew." His hand remained steady on the pistol as he continued. "I have spent years watching you. Vales enjoy the privileges of a position that should have been partially mine. When I discovered Thaddeus's indiscretion with Professor Marin, I saw an opportunity to reclaim what was denied me." "By destroying evidence and attempting murder?" Helena asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "By controlling the narrative," Edwin corrected, "just as the Vales have always done. The difference is merely in the methods employed." The Duke took a single step forward, drawing Edwin's attention fully to himself. "Whatever grievances you hold against this family, Edwin, they do not justify what you have done, or what you now propose." "Step back, Adrian," Edwin warned, the pistol unwavering. "Your charmed life has left you unfamiliar with true desperation." What happened next occurred with such swiftness that Helena would later struggle to recall the precise sequence. The Duke lunged forward just as Edwin's finger tightened on the trigger. The report of the pistol was deafening in the confined space. Lady Isolde screamed. Helena found herself moving without conscious thought, driven by instinct rather than reason. And then, impossibly, it was Edwin who staggered backward, the pistol falling from his grasp as crimson bloomed across his chest. Behind him stood Alice Rowe, her face pale but determined, a small pearl-handled revolver clutched in her trembling hand. "He would have killed you all," she said simply, as Edwin crumpled to the floor. In the frozen tableau that followed, Helena became aware of the Duke standing beside her, his hand once again at her elbow, steadying her. He appeared unharmed, though a bullet hole marred the wall where he had stood moments before. "I always suspected Edwin harbored resentments," he said quietly, "but I misunderstood their depth and direction." Lady Isolde had moved to Edwin's side, her initial shock giving way to practical action as she pressed a handkerchief against his wound. "He lives, though God knows whether he deserves to." She looked up at Alice with newfound respect. "Your intervention was both timely and unexpectedly skilled, Miss Rowe." Alice lowered the revolver, her composure returning. "My father was a military man, my lady. He believed daughters should be capable of self-defense." The Duke turned to Helena, his expression softening in a way she had not witnessed before. "Are you injured?" "No." She glanced toward her father, relieved to see that he had fallen back into unconsciousness, spared the trauma of the violence that had erupted around him. "But I believe we all have been, in ways less visible than bullet wounds." "Indeed." The Duke's hand moved from her elbow to take her hand, the gesture so unexpected that she forgot to withdraw it. "When this immediate crisis has passed, we have much to discuss. About your father, about the journals, and about what truths might finally be acknowledged after 15 years of silence." Around them, servants had begun to respond to the emergency, some attending to Edwin, others fetching the physician, still others securing the fallen pistol. Lady Isolde had risen to take charge, her natural authority reasserting itself in crisis. Yet through it all, the Duke's hand remained clasped around Helena's, warm and unexpectedly human. Outside, the morning sun had fully risen, bathing Ravenswood Manor in light that seemed to penetrate even the darkest corners of its troubled history. For the first time since entering its gates, Helena felt not dread but possibility, as if the truth, once fully revealed, might prove not destructive, but healing. The Duke's fingers tightened around hers, a gesture so slight it might have been unconscious. In the quiet certainty of that touch, Helena sensed the first fragile promise of a future not defined by old wounds, but by new understanding. "It will be well," the Duke said softly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not immediately, perhaps, but eventually. Truth has that quality. Once unleashed, it finds its own path toward light. And in that moment, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, yet standing in the morning sun, Helena found herself believing him. The gardens of Ravenswood Manor bloomed with unprecedented vigor that spring, as if the land itself celebrated the lifting of a long shadow. 6 months had passed since the events that had nearly claimed 3 lives and had irrevocably altered many more. Professor James Marin, recovered sufficiently to walk short distances with the aid of a cane, sat beneath a flowering cherry tree, his thin face lifted toward the warming sun. At a wrought-iron table nearby, Helena and the Duke, Adrian as she had come to call him in private, reviewed the final proofs of a scholarly monograph entitled Astronomical Observations at Dendera, the collaborative research of Thaddeus Vale and James Marin. Its imminent publication by the Royal Society represented the culmination of months of careful work and delicate negotiations. "The preface requires your signature as well," Adrian said, sliding the document toward her. "As co-executor of your father's intellectual legacy, your endorsement carries equal weight to mine." Helena's pen moved smoothly across the page, her signature flowing beside his in what struck her as a fitting symbol of their unlikely alliance. The Society's acceptance was more readily gained than I anticipated. Truth, when presented with incontrovertible evidence, has a certain compelling quality. Adrian's voice held the warmth that had gradually replaced its former coldness, a transformation as remarkable as the spring that had followed winter. Though I suspect Sir William's support proved instrumental in overcoming lingering resistance. "Sir William's support would have been withheld had you not approached him directly," Helena observed. "Your willingness to acknowledge past wrongs publicly cannot have been easy." Adrian's gaze moved toward the distant figure of her father. "Easier than continuing to perpetuate them. The Vale name means little if it stands for suppression rather than honor." From across the lawn came the sound of feminine laughter, Lady Isolde and Alice Rowe strolled along the rose garden path, an unlikely friendship that had blossomed from mutual respect born in crisis. Isolde's initial coldness had thawed gradually as she witnessed Helena's dedication to historical accuracy rather than retribution. "My sister mentions opening Ravenswood for a musicale next month," Adrian remarked. "The first entertainment this house has seen since Charlotte's passing. She suggests your father might enjoy hearing Chopin performed by something other than my inadequate efforts." Helena smiled at the memory of that midnight encounter in the music room, a turning point neither had fully recognized at the time. "He would be honored, as would I." "The honor would be mine," Adrian replied, his voice dropping to a register that still sent an unexpected warmth through her veins, as it has been these past months. Their hands lay side by side on the table, not quite touching, the same careful distance they had maintained throughout their evolving relationship. Propriety and caution had governed their interactions, despite the profound connection that had formed between them during the investigation into Edwin's crimes. Edwin himself now resided at Her Majesty's pleasure in Newgate Prison, his wound healed, but his freedom forfeit. His confession had revealed a scheme more complex than any had suspected. Years of quiet sabotage designed to undermine the Vale family, while positioning himself to control its legacy. The fire at Professor Maron's cottage had been a desperate measure, enacted when he realized that the transcription of Thaddeus's journals would expose not only the truth of the collaboration, but also Edwin's role in suppressing it. "I received a letter from the solicitor yesterday," Adrian said, breaking the contemplative silence that had fallen between them. "Edwin's trial date is set for next month. Your testimony will be required." "I shall be there," Helena replied, though the prospect brought no pleasure. "Justice demands completion, however painful the process." Adrian nodded, his expression thoughtful. Justice, an admirable principle, yet sometimes an insufficient one. "What would you consider sufficient, then?" "Restoration." His gaze met hers directly, not merely of reputation or position, but of human connection, of trust, of possibility. The weight of unspoken meaning hung between them. In the months since the confrontation with Edwin, their relationship had evolved from reluctant allies to collaborative partners, to something less definable yet more significant. The strict employer and humble employee had vanished, replaced by two individuals who recognized in each other qualities long overlooked by the world. "Adrian," Helena began, uncertain how to navigate the territory that lay before them. He saved her from fumbling further by reaching into his coat pocket and withdrawing a small object wrapped in silk. "I had this repaired," he said, placing it on the table between them. "It belongs to your father, I believe." Helena unwrapped the silk to reveal Thaddeus Vale's signet ring, restored to its former glory, the falcon emblem gleaming in the spring sunlight. "He will be deeply moved. There is something else." Adrian hesitated, a rare display of uncertainty in a man accustomed to commanding his world. "Something I have wished to say for some time, yet propriety and timing have counseled delay." Helena felt her heart quicken despite her efforts at composure. "I am listening." "They called me a duke without a heart," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers, "and perhaps they were not entirely wrong. After Charlotte died, I retreated into coldness, finding refuge in duty and distance. I believed emotion to be a weakness I could no longer afford." He reached across the table then, his fingers lightly touching hers in a gesture that, despite its gentleness, felt more intimate than any embrace. "Your presence in my home, your integrity, your quiet courage, your tears for your father, awakened something I thought long buried, not merely compassion, but the capacity to feel fully human again." Helena sat very still, scarcely breathing, as he continued. "I do not offer pretty words or romantic declarations. My nature remains more shadow than light, but I offer honesty, respect, and a heart once thought lost, now returned to life through your influence." "Adrian," she whispered, her voice catching. "What are you asking?" "For permission to court you properly, not as duke and copyist, not as aristocrat and commoner, but as a man who has found, unexpectedly, that life holds more possibility than duty alone." Tears welled in Helena's eyes, not of sorrow or fear, but of a joy so acute it bordered on pain. "They would talk," she said softly. "Society would not easily accept such a match. Let them talk." For the first time, Adrian smiled fully, the expression transforming his austere features with unexpected warmth. "We have survived far worse than gossip." Across the garden, Professor Maron had begun to doze beneath the cherry tree, his face peaceful in repose. Lady Isolde and Alice had paused by a fountain, deep in conversation. The world continued its ordinary rhythms, unaware of the extraordinary moment unfolding at a wrought-iron table beneath the spring sky. Helena turned her hand beneath Adrian's, their fingers intertwining in silent affirmation. "Yes," she said simply, "I would welcome your courtship." Later that evening, as dusk settled over Ravenswood Manor, Adrian Vale stood alone in Charlotte's music room. No, it was simply the music room now, reclaimed from grief and secrecy. His fingers traced the keys of the pianoforte without pressing them, a silent acknowledgement of what had been and what might yet be. The red journal lay open on the desk, where Helena had first discovered its secrets, its pages now familiar, its truths no longer hidden. Beside it rested a more recent volume, Helena's own journal, in which she had documented their investigations with the same careful precision she brought to all her work. On its last completed page, she had written words that Adrian had glimpsed by chance, words that had given him the courage to speak his heart that afternoon. They called him a duke without a heart, until my father's tears made him human again. In that moment, watching him kneel beside the bed of a man society had discarded, I witnessed the birth of something miraculous. Compassion breaking through stone, warmth melting ice, truth defeating fear. And in that thawing, I found my own heart changing as well. We are, all of us, more than the stories others tell about us. We are the choices we make when falsehood would be easier than honesty, when coldness would be safer than feeling. The Duke has chosen truth, however painful. In doing so, he has taught me that courage wears many faces, and that transformation often begins in the moments we least expect, when a heart presumed absent suddenly proves itself gloriously, imperfectly alive. Adrian closed the journal gently, respecting the privacy of thoughts shared unwittingly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the publication announcement, society's reaction, the continued healing of old wounds. But tonight, in the quiet of the music room, he allowed himself to feel the full measure of what had transpired. Not merely the solving of a mystery or the righting of an old wrong, but the rediscovery of his own humanity. He seated himself at the pianoforte and began to play. Not Chopin's Nocturne this time, but a simpler piece, a melody Charlotte had loved for its unadorned beauty. The notes rose into the evening air, no longer a memorial to what was lost, but a celebration of what remained, the capacity to grow, to change, to begin anew. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, witnesses to the quiet revolution that had transpired within Ravenswood's walls, where truth had finally triumphed over artifice, where tears had melted stone, and where a heart once thought irretrievably lost had found its way home again. In the quietude that follows every great story, we find ourselves contemplating the deeper truths that echo in our own lives. They called him a duke without a heart, reminds us that the coldest facades often guard the most wounded souls, and that true redemption begins not with grand gestures, but with moments of unguarded humanity. A tear shed, a hand extended, a truth finally spoken. The Duke and Helena teach us that our reputations and our reality may stand worlds apart. Society crafts narratives about us, cold, heartless, disgraced, fallen, but these stories hold power only when we ourselves accept them as immutable truth. Each of us carries the capacity for transformation, waiting like a dormant seed for the right moment to flourish. Perhaps most poignantly, this tale reminds us that healing rarely travels a straight path. It comes through unexpected encounters, through the courage to face painful truths, through allowing ourselves to be seen in our vulnerability rather than our strength. The heart calcified by grief does not suddenly become whole. Rather, it thaws gradually, painfully, as sunlight melts winter ice, revealing beneath the frozen surface waters still capable of reflecting the sky. In a world that often values appearance over substance, power over compassion, and convenience over truth, may we all find the courage to recognize the humanity in one another, and in doing so, reclaim the fullness of our own. Did this tale of redemption, truth, and the thawing of a frozen heart touch something within you? Perhaps you've witnessed your own transformation, or helped another find their way back to humanity after loss. Your story matters just as much as the Duke and Helena's. Subscribe for more emotional historical romances that explore the depths of the human heart and the power of vulnerability to transform even the most guarded souls. Each week, a new chapter of possibility awaits. Leave a comment below sharing the moment that moved you most. Was it the Duke's midnight confession at the pianoforte, Helena's unwavering integrity, or perhaps the professor's resilient dignity in the face of injustice? Your reflections enrich our collective experience of these timeless themes. Together, let us celebrate stories that remind us of our capacity for growth, redemption, and the courage to begin again, no matter how hardened our hearts may have become.